So the first thing we always say is, this is not about whether surrogacy is good or bad. This is about the question, how can surrogacy be practiced in a way that we could be proud of and positive about? And that's the first, thing you should take home. It's not about, some sort of a known, quality called surrogacy. It's about how you break this down such that the welfare and the well-being of all the people involved is taken into consideration, that the different perspectives are all being considered, and that it is not done in a process in which your triumph comes at the expense of somebody else's rights or safety or well-being being compromised. So we created what we call the ethical framework for surrogacy, which is on our website and might be one of your handouts. And we did that with the help of a group of surrogates who, until now, we have an advisory committee of surrogates. But by now we have surrogates on the board and in our team, and also by consulting with a lot of associations across the world, quite frankly, because surrogacy is being attacked from the right by conservatives who don't want us to be parents or are suspicious about why we want to be parents, and also from the left, quote unquote, from people who are concerned that we're taking advantage of women, and it is even defined by some of them as violence against women. Certainly terms being used such as trafficking, etc. So we had to articulate that to ourselves. And by articulating it, we thought of a lot of things we haven't thought before. And this ties into a lot of things you heard it the last day and a half, including the interesting conversation we had this morning about compensation, about what is altruistic, what is commercial, what is the surrogate getting wages, or is she working for us? Is she providing a service? So we had to articulate all these things in order to get connected to what we felt, as I mentioned before, in our guts. So I'll mention a few of those issues in a minute, but obviously, first and foremost, realize that they're all on our website, and we hope that you will read them a little further if you're interested. But so the first thing we did, as far as our first foray into advocacy, was what do we think are the conditions under which surrogacy can be practiced ethically. The second thing was trying to fight for more legal access to surrogacy. And that is including several states in the United States that up until recently did not have regulated or legally safe or compensated surrogacy allowed. So it is now, by the way, one of the last frontiers is Michigan, where the legislator flipped in the last election, and now there is really at hand the very likelihood that Michigan will be one of the last states that will allow compensated surrogacy legally very, very soon. New York came only 3 years ago, and that was one of the times when we had the most, thankfully, the most access to influence how the surrogacy reform, surrogacy bill that was written. And we're very proud about the fact that a lot of issues have been listened to and have been found their way into the New York surrogacy reform in a way that we feel is most conducive to protecting everybody's rights and well-being, etc. So the problem is that years ago, gay men thought that a lot of gay men just assumed they're not going to be parents. And as we and many other associations and society at large has moved to a reality where we can marry and we can form families much more easily than before, now we were facing with a new, very, very cruel situation, cruel reality, that it is legal, it is even socially acceptable more and more, but financially unattainable to more and more people. So, or to enough people. So, such that getting legal access to surrogacy and getting rid of some of the social barriers only left us at a point where we, as gay men, who require the most assistance in becoming parents by a surrogate, by an egg donor, an expensive medical process, ended up in a situation where very big parts of our community were just not able to afford it. And that is why we're, of course, as I said, we're providing financial assistance and some guidance about making it more transparent, etc. But we realize that there are a lot of financial obstacles that are systemic and that we can work to fight. And some of them have to do, once again, with things you've heard over the weekend. So all these things about insurances that are not covering your surrogate, or that a certain percentage of surrogates are such that you would need to buy extra insurance, even if you're lucky, and wait until the open enrollment and can buy the affordable care policies, etc. That's another cost, a big cost for you, and it's not necessary. So we're fighting to make sure that those exclusions and discriminatory policies will no longer be tolerated. You can't write off surrogacy-related expenses as a tax deductible income. We've initiated and we're part of a coalition that last year submitted a bill, I know it hasn't passed yet, to Congress. This is a federal thing, to allow for such deductions. It hasn't gone through yet, but we made some, good progress. We always look for regulatory, paths, or even ways to use lawsuits, or to get to some of these outcomes, given that legislation, certainly federal legislation, is the most difficult. So we're pursuing some of those tracks as well. And we're going to talk about it a little more in a few minutes, but we also, one of the major projects of the advocacy agenda we have right now is to redefine the concept of infertility. So infertility is currently defined by law in most places as a purely medical condition or disease. And we always felt that if there is, because remember, a lot of discussions that you heard today were about whether or not insurance will cover the surrogate, maternity and delivery, whether it's going to cover the newborns. But the reality is that almost always the insurance doesn't cover the IVF for us. So that is something we also, that is kind of like the ultimate frontier for us, because we feel that if there's insurance anywhere that covers IVF for a heterosexual couple that is defined as medically infertile, it should also cover it for us. And the term sometimes we use is structural infertility or status, and that thankfully has started, that, we were starting to move the ball on that one as well, as now there is a new definition of infertility that has been devised, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. We have a representative of one of these organizations, by several organizations, to include us. It's also already has been legislated in Illinois. So in Illinois, a gay couple is treated under some circumstances, which we can explore a bit today, but more tomorrow in a panel we have about coverage at work, can get free IVF as the same way that a couple that is medically infertile. There are bills right now in several states, including, you guessed it, California, that would achieve the same outcome. So that's an example, but also an important part of our advocacy agenda, because as I said before, we want to make sure that we feel, confident and proud about the way we become parents, but we also do not, cannot tolerate. I couldn't tolerate, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, the thought that some people have now traded, sexual orientation discrimination with social demographic, socioeconomic discrimination. that now that's what's preventing them from becoming parents. So this was my way of giving a quick introduction to what is advocacy for us. I should also mention there's a lot of work we do around stigma, and it is a different discussion we would have been having right now if we were talking in Europe, where the issues are a little different. But suffice it to say that this gives you a taste of the advocacy work we're doing and why it takes really, a community organization to tackle what you're doing right now beyond just the prescriptive checklists and tips we're giving you throughout this weekend. And this was also by way of stalling so that we can present the entire panel to you. And now we have three, terrific people that I want to first have them say a few words about who they are, and then I'm going to invite my colleague Alan to, transition the conversation into, the next topic. So why don't we just go one by one? Brent, can you just go ahead?
Yeah, as everyone can hear me. I'm Dr. Brent Monseur. I am a reproductive endocrinologist, and I have a practice in Silicon Valley that's based at Stanford University. I'm also on the committee for developing guidelines for LGBTQ family building with the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. And my research team has produced the largest assessments of sexual and gender minorities using medically assisted reproduction to build their families. So not just focused on cisgender, gay, or single men, but also for transgender, gender expansive individuals, and sexual minority women.
Hi everyone, my name is Mimi Demissew. I'm the Executive Director of Our Family Coalition. Our Family Coalition is an organization that's been around for 25 years in the Bay Area. Our entire mission is to support LGBTQ families in the full expanding spectrum of what LGBTQ means to have children, and we advocate for LGBTQ families through education, support programs, and in fact, we just recently co-sponsored Senate Bill 729 so that we can expand fertility coverage. And once you do have your children, you're probably going to want to meet more parents who look like you and also go through all the regular problems of trying to raise a toddler or a teenager. And we have all of those types of support systems in place, and also provide a lot of advocacy once you go into the school system, which is another challenge of raising a kid and within your own family structure, and then having your kids go to school and being taught something else, or having your families being excluded from the lessons that your children are receiving. So that's another large part of the work that we do is in education.
Hi, I'm Deborah Wald. I'm a practicing attorney here in the Bay Area. I've actually been in my law practice doing LGBTQ family building as well as litigating on behalf of LGBTQ parents for almost 30 years now. I'm here today on this panel primarily though as the chair of the National Family Law Advisory Council of the National Center for Lesbian Rights. NCLR has been one of the foremost legal organizations in the country litigating on behalf of lesbian, gay, and trans families and youth. And so it's actually a huge honor for me to be the chair of the National Family Law Advisory Council, which represents about 30 states, and is essentially a think tank of attorneys who do this work on the ground, where we come together and talk about what's working and what isn't, and strategies for better protecting our families. And I will just say, we go through ebbs and flows. Since Obergefell, we had a little ebb of them sort of NCLR not needing so much input, and it is wild out there right now. So I'm really glad you're here. It's a good moment to be talking about these issues because they're back in the forefront.
And Alan Campbell is our research associate, and he's going to say a few words about why this is not just an advocacy, but an advocacy and research forum, and help us transition to what we'd like to cover more this evening.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and to be able to speak with you. Tonight, a little bit, I'm going to start focusing on the research piece. Ron shared what we do with our advocacy agenda. I'm going to talk a little bit about how research informs what we do. Can I get the screen on, please? Thank you. So, as Ron mentioned, our ethical framework very clearly states that we believe that medical and social science research is necessary for us to promote and carry out ethical surrogacy. So research is important to us as an organization because we believe it helps us do what we're meant to do in promoting ethical surrogacy. Some of the research that we know so far from what we've gathered is that we've got really good scientific data about experiences and the psychological outcomes of being a surrogate. We know a lot from research about the impact that surrogacy can have on surrogates and their families and their children. We have great social science and psychological research about the outcomes for children that are born through surrogacy, and we know a lot about those psychological outcomes for the families. So when we look at research, we understand how important it is for us as things change and evolve, as we continue to develop what these best practices are. We do use research to help inform those decisions and recommendations that turn into documents like an ethical framework. Some of the things that we know from research, here's an example of a book that was written that kind of takes the stigma and then compares it to reality. So we've got stigma related to some of the people that choose to become surrogates, and we know that some of these misconceptions are such that like surrogates have a hard time, so they have to give up a child, or that pregnancy isn't pleasurable to anyone, and there's no way that someone might do this because they want to. Or that surrogates are coerced or induced, and we know that the reality based on research is the opposite, and we've got loads of data about this, right? And we have longitudinal studies going back almost 30 years that we can look to. Men Having Babies has a great resource here at menhavingbabies.org/books. You can see all of our recommended reading. It's not just kids' books. We've got lots of our research-based books that are in our book list, and then we also have a research library that shows just study upon study upon study that might be interesting to you if you want to look deeper into these issues. Talking about surrogates, we believe that a well-screened surrogate is really the starting point to help us have such great outcomes. We believe that the research has showed us that screening is really the starting point to help us have success in what we believe to be ethical surrogacy. And so just a quick look at the demographics shows that we can see that some of these stigmas that people might think about don't necessarily hold true. When we look at household income or age or family status, we can see that based on data from research that some of those misconceptions that are held in society just simply aren't true. We do know that, again, this is just an example of what research has showed us, that we believe that starting with a well-screened surrogate process really does benefit the entire journey and all those that are involved in this very multi-dimensional aspect of building a family. Not to overwhelm you, but this is just a little bit of the data that we have. We're really excited that we host a research library. It is multidisciplinary. We have research from basically every scientific field that may be related to either LGBTQ family building or specifically to surrogacy. It's at our website, /research, so feel free to take a look at that. And we've got some new documents that we're going to be publishing that make it a little bit easier to consume some of this sometimes heavy scientific and academic data. I do want to just finish and say that some of the things that are happening right now in academia and in other institutions that carry out research, the number one takeaway I want you to realize is that it's multidisciplinary. There's research happening in all of the fields. So just to name a few: psychology, social anthropology, reproductive sociology, family studies, and ethnography. We've got active research happening in just the legal fields. You've heard a lot about legal. There's 2 great centers that are dedicated to studying the legal aspects of building families in unique ways. Media studies, there's some really interesting research about how the media is influencing commonly held perceptions about surrogacy. And we've got some researchers in Europe that are doing some really deep research about media and the way it influences the way people think about how we build our families. And last but not least, I want to talk about how important it is for us in managing the risk associated with surrogacy. We know that one of the fundamental ethical questions as relates to surrogacy as a way to build families is about whether or not we can justify the medical risk to the surrogate, right? There's a high risk. How do we justify that? One of the things that we have to take into account is that medical research is absolutely necessary so we can do everything we can to reduce that risk. And that's one of the fundamental aspects of our ethical framework, is reducing the medical risk to the surrogate so that it can be justified as a way to build our family. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Monseur to come talk about his research, about what he's doing, and to share a little bit about what he's got published so far and what he's working on moving forward that will again contribute to the literature and to then our ability to continue to promote ethical surrogacy practices. So with that, Dr.
Can I
Monseur.
speak from here, or it's up to you?
I can go up there. Let's see, am I double mic'd or am I good? Good to go. So thank you, Alan, for the introduction, and thank you, Ron, for the opportunity to talk. So as I alluded to, in the fall, I will be joining the faculty at Stanford University, and I will be the director of the nation's first LGBTQ family building clinical research program. And so we will track decision-making and clinical outcomes for all sexual and gender minorities that are using medically assisted reproduction to build their families. We'll also complement the work that's already being done with the PRIDE study. For those of you that are familiar, that's the largest long-term national study that is tracking health outcomes in LGBTQ individuals. Many of you are likely eligible, and if you'd like to learn more, you can do so at pridestudy.org. But until we get this data that we're going to collect moving forward, we've been doing some research using databases that uniquely have information both on sexual orientation as well as use of assisted reproductive technologies. Most recently, last year, my research team partnered with a fertility benefits company to look at the largest cohort of US men that were using gestational carriers and egg donors to build their families. And what we found primarily echoed smaller studies done regionally across the country, which shows that men having babies primarily use egg donation and gestational carrier in an agency-based way. And those that are in couples, there is a focus to have 2 children, often with both producing sperm samples to be used. And a couple other findings showing that genetic testing is very common. But I think the findings that I wanted to focus on tonight, there are 2. The first is that in every man that was in our study that we followed nationally, every single one of them achieved a pregnancy after an embryo transfer. And because of a very low miscarriage rate, over 85% achieved a live birth, a healthy baby being delivered. And this is in stark contrast to what fertility clinics usually see and the success rates that we usually have, because we're often taking care of a community that may have infertility or a specific medical diagnosis that decreases those success rates. And so what we posit is that our community, the men having babies community, actually sets the new gold standard for a modern fertility clinic. We have the ideal ingredients, oftentimes 1 or more sperm sources. We have the use of a healthy young egg donor, as well as a proven uterus. So with these ideal ingredients, it really sets the cap of what success can look like at a fertility clinic. And so I think that's something that we really have to highlight because we kind of will show the limit of current technologies and how we can be successful. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is that while most of the men in our study did pursue with a single embryo transfer, over a quarter did use more than 1 embryo being placed back, or a double embryo transfer. This is important because this is a divergence from best practices as published from the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. And we think that this is often done because of perceived increase in success by putting back more than 1, or there may be a perception that you'll decrease cost because you can kind of do 2 and have the 2 children right away. But the reality is that there is substantial increased risk, both to the intended parents, to the future child or children, and the gestational carrier, due to the risks and complications associated with twin, triplets, and other higher order pregnancies. The reason I bring this up is as we transition into this panel and talking about advocacy and an ethical framework, I'll share data from the Society for Assisted Reproductive Technologies. This has never been reported, and our research team will be publishing on this later this year. However, as of 2018, men using a combined egg donation and a gestational carrier actually represent the majority of all treatment cycles in the United States. And so that means that our community has a responsibility to be stewards of ethical guidelines and how we are using surrogates. And I think I just want to end by saying that every one of us in this room, whether professionally and or personally involved in this men having babies journey, we are transforming the definition of the traditional family and kinship, and we can work together as we have this next gay baby boom, or gayby boom as it's been called in the literature, to really kind of decide what are the best practices and what is the way that we can do this in the most ethical approach moving forward.
Wonderful. Let me just say, by the way, that the slides you saw before when Alan was speaking were part of a series of presentations that we provided virtually to legislators in the European Parliament. Several different parties in the European Parliament have, as they are discussing this issue of surrogacy, have been inviting us to talk to their members of Parliament about our position regarding surrogacy, and this is a small part of that position, about that presentation. And we were often, not often, always, contrasted with people who came from anti-surrogacy groups that are very organized and focused and vocal in Europe, so much so that they are behind some legislation. One of them passed recently in Spain that defines surrogacy as violence against women. And we would have an opponent in these discussions that would repeat this term many times, but never once show any evidence in research or in any type of accepted reasonable logic why this is the case, which is why it is very important for us to have research. But when we have research, we can, sometimes it sounds like we're faking a bit because, we're selecting the group that we're researching. So we're selecting, the best, candidates to be surrogates, and then, lo and behold, the outcomes are good. We have a self-selected group of parents who are willing to, go through huge lengths to become parents, and lo and behold, they're good parents, But in our case, this is not cheating. This is exactly what we're trying to say. What we're trying to say is that it's not about whether or not you should do it, but how. So if you make sure that the risks are minimal, and if you follow protocols that are, for ethical treatment, and if then the outcomes are good. So we're researching whether the outcomes of our protocols are successful, and the answer is yes. So one of the major questions that came up in those presentations is surrogacy a gay issue? Because why are we there defending surrogacy as an LGBT association? Notwithstanding what you just said, definitely we didn't invent surrogacy, and definitely we're not the only ones, and I doubt that we're, the majority really worldwide of people who are pursuing surrogacy, perhaps in the United States. I'm not even sure about that, but I'll accept the evidence though, because research is research. But is it a gay issue? And what we want to do here is we have representatives of two associations that are phenomenal, and we've been collaborating with Our Family Coalition for, I think this is probably our 8th or 9th time here in San Francisco. And that's not a men having babies association. It's an all gender, all orientations, well, I guess mostly LGBT, but still not as focused as us. And they have been, alongside with us in our effort to bring this kind of guidance and discussion to this group. And NCLR, as Deb was mentioning before, is, at least originally, an organization for lesbian rights we've been collaborating with as well. So what we want to ask here are two types of questions. The first one is, as an LGBTQ, as a minority, which rightfully so we can argue has been marginalized and discriminated and in a position where we can say we need assistance. We have obstacles that are beyond what is the social, norm. We want to have this triumph. We want to have a family. But do we have extra responsibility, as Brent was also alluding, to make sure that we're not trampling over other people in does the end justify the means? And of course, the answer to that, the right answer is no. But as LGBT people, should we be even more responsible? Not just if we're a majority or not. So I'll start, open this first, because I think Mimi and Deb, you can think of other opportunities where we think that, we have responsibilities and as such, and also why you think, that, for you, is this something that is also of interest to you? Go ahead, Mimi, first.
Well, I want to just take a step back and just be and just talk about like the issues when we talk about let's be ethical or let's be fair, or do we have more of a responsibility? LGBTQ community, LGBTQ movement isn't free of racism, isn't free of sexism. In fact, when we really look at the history of LGBTQ movements, you see how deeply racist, how deeply anti-Black it has been, how deeply sexist it has been, how deeply anti-trans it has been, even though our movements have started because of trans communities, of Black trans communities, people of color, women of color, right? And so these are the things that we have to first name these harms before we can talk about what is ethical. And then we also have to even think about our language, like change the way that we're talking about how we like you're not using a surrogate, you're partnering with a woman. You're partnering with someone who's consenting to do this journey with your family, right? And so we have to even think about how are we speaking about this? And then, I think not only do we have more of a responsibility, but I mean, everyone has a responsibility to constantly try to take a cultural humility perspective in how we deal with each other and how we deal with this in community with one another. We have to be in a constant state of learning. And when gay white men are saying, hey, I'm a minority, I really pause because, we have to think about it intersectionally, right? Like, yes, you're a sexual minority, but think about your other privileges. And when we talk to Black gay men, or when we talk to Black trans women, like, there are so many other isms that are affecting their lives that we can almost scoff and laugh when we hear like our gay white male counterparts talking about being minorities. So when we think about the movement, we have to really think about our most marginalized groups, even within our own movement. And what are we doing to uplift those groups?
So here. And what I would add to that, so NCLR has spent, it was the Lesbian Rights Project when it started, and it started for the purpose, it was born from the experience of lesbians having their children taken away from them because they were lesbians. And so really the core mission of NCLR, and it does so many other things now as well, but the core mission of NCLR has been to protect LGBTQ people who are parenting, however they get there. And clearly, people who are having children through surrogacy, LGBTQ people who are having children through surrogacy are included in LGBTQ people who need protection through, need legal protection. And so, that's pretty much our framework, and very consciously an intersectional view on that. And I can tell you that included, along with advocating for the things that were mentioned before that Ron was talking about in terms of getting better insurance coverage for medical treatment, we also have been very mindful of trying to make sure, in my law practice and also in my work with NCLR, I see gay men who are having babies by getting a friend pregnant, with no doctors involved, with no clinics involved, with no lawyers involved sometimes. I see lesbians who are getting pregnant by sleeping with men. And we try to keep the entire scope of how people within our community actually have children, and recognition that we do it lots of different ways, and really keep that view on how do we make sure we're all protected? How do we make sure all of our rights are protected? The other thing I have to say in terms of what Ron was saying is the attack we're seeing on reproductive rights and reproductive choice and reproductive freedom, which the Dobbs decision was the bellwether of that in terms of outlawing abortion, and now we're seeing the first state just enacted a law banning the use of abortion pills. There are, if the state is allowed to attack access to health care, and particularly access to reproductive health care, that has an immediate impact on people looking to pursue surrogacy. It has an immediate impact on trans youth who need gender-affirming care. And the attacks are multifaceted. It's actually scared the crap out of me to hear that gay male couples are now the people who are most using the fertility services, because if that word gets out, then the attacks are going to ramp up. We're very aware that lesbian couples are using sperm banks far more than straight couples are now, because male infertility has largely been solved by this new system where they can take one sperm and inject it into an egg. So if a guy's sperm doesn't know how to swim, it doesn't matter anymore. So with that, it's single women and lesbians who need sperm banks, and as that word gets out, sperm banks are going to be at risk. So we're in an extremely politicized moment. Whether you want to be trailbreakers or radical or not in your approach to life, you are in a position right now where you need to be aware. I will say that right now when I see gay couples in my law practice who are being matched by programs with surrogates in Texas and Florida, I have to ask myself why a responsible program would do that right now. It was not even a week after Dobbs came down that we saw within the surrogacy legal community the first case of a surrogate in Idaho who needed medical treatment urgently. Her life was in danger. The baby was not going to make it. And a network had to pull together to get her across the border to Oregon to get the treatment she needed. So when we talk about an ethical approach to surrogacy, when we talk about being thoughtful about keeping our surrogates safe as well as keeping ourselves and our partners safe, we need to be looking at all of that. The risk we may be putting a woman in by carrying a child for us is very different if she's in Texas right now than if she's in California or Oregon or Washington State, where her access to her needed health care is not in danger. So I just want to make sure we're all mindful of the bigger context in which we're doing this.
Yeah, I do want to piggyback on that. I don't know how many folks are aware of this, and probably learn more about it tomorrow, but America has the highest maternal mortality rate, right? It's really dangerous to try to give birth in America. And it's even more dangerous if you happen to be a Black woman, right? And a part of that danger isn't even just in giving the birth, but is the lack of healthcare resources after the child is delivered. There isn't a lot of maternal care. So when we're talking about let's be ethical, it's not just, okay, great, the baby's here, goodbye, but what happens to that woman's body after that child has been delivered? There's a lot of care that needs to be taking place afterwards. And those things aren't available. One, because the healthcare system is just really poor in this country, and some states have it even worse, like Texas, right? And that's done intentionally, and it's done by design because the healthcare system is run by your state.
I want to touch upon something you Deb said and something you, Mimi, said as well to also help us get to the next issue we wanted to raise. And first of all, yes, there is a point in time in which we could say as much as we want. Egg donation is not, I'm sorry, sperm donation is not a gay issue, surrogacy is not a gay issue, but we might not be persuading anybody because, I don't know if you know, but in Europe over the last decade where there were several instances where marriage equality or some instances civil unions were brought to a referendum. And many times the no campaign, the people who were trying to stop that progress were rallying around surrogacy. They were saying, they were waving the flag of surrogacy, saying if you have marriage equality, you'll get more surrogacy, which of course everybody knows is bad. So we could pretend or try to advocate that sperm donation or surrogacy are not gay issues, but you know, our detractors might, or our political enemies might not buy that. And I think what you just said, Deb, in that regard is very prudent. But also want to talk about the fact that I think white gay men this weekend were a minority here, not alone elsewhere. And that there is a misconception about the fact that surrogacy is a white, privileged, male topic. And men having babies is all about the fact that it's not just for the privileged, that we can't tolerate that it will be just for the privileged. But there are those stereotypes and those stigmas are allowed to persist. And alongside them is also a type of sexist approach that questions, should we be parents? Or is our urge to be parents equal to the urge of females to be parents? There is not a lot of empathy in society to people like us, to the point that we're not be defined by people's perceptions as childless when we're trying to have a child. Who's a childless person? Mostly a woman who can't become a parent because she has infertility issues. She might have a supportive husband, but he's not even considered by society most times as childless. And for us, not only are people not thoroughly convinced that we'll be, some of us, and we're not advocating for every gay man to become a parent, not by far. I don't even need to know that most gay parents want to become parents, most gay men want to become parents. That's not necessary. But we know that a lot of us do. A lot of us feel that our full human potential is not going to be, achieved without parenthood. That's how we feel. It's a natural, legitimate feeling to have, but it's being questioned by society. And sometimes possibly within our community.
Absolutely.
And that is our second question. We do have the obligation to think about intersectional, issues and the full picture and etc. But do we also have the right to ask our sisters and brothers in the LGBTQ community to try to better understand where we're coming from and join us, and of course I'm asking the wrong people because you've joined us already, in our attempts to fight this stigma, to fight these perceptions, and to also reduce some of these barriers. But maybe it seemed to resonate what I said before. I mean, do you think sometimes you see that attitude, or you think that that's something that might exist out there?
Yeah, I think, gay folks wanting to have kids and have a family are marginalized within the gay community because it's like, why? What are you doing and why are you trying to be heteronormative, et cetera? So there is already a stigma within the community when you want to say, no, I want to have children, I want to have a family. I mean, that is an issue. And just anecdotally, I mean, this is the problem of when we have these deeply sexist societies that say that men are not caregivers, men are not supposed to be wanting to have kids, or why does he want to babysit? Why is he looking at the kid? It's not a deviant behavior to want to love a child. I mean, it's actually humane. We should encourage that more. And just anecdotally, I'm a parent of a 4-year-old, so that puts me in rooms with lots of other parents, and a lot of time in rooms with a lot of straight parents. And to meet straight parents is to meet, a group of single mothers, essentially, because their male counterparts don't have to be involved at all. Whereas in our community, I just see this beautiful family structure that's really based on an egalitarian way of raising your kids, because we don't have to play gender roles. Like, we're both responsible for this child that we both chose to bring into this world or into our family, depending on how you choose to have a family, right? Surrogacy, adoption, in vitro, there's many different ways.
Can I add something to that? So we learned the hard way in California the importance of being proud and out about our parenting and our children, because in the fight against Prop 8, the powers that be decided it was too scary to put out publicly that gay people had children. And they hid our children.
Wow.
And they hid those of us who were parents. We were told not to talk about that. And it was because of what Ron said is still happening in Europe to some extent, that this concept that if gay people can marry, will have children, means we shouldn't be able to marry. And that approach did not work at all. And in fact, what humanized us and made California shift was starting to understand us as parents and as families and meeting our children. And I have y'all beat, because my kids are 27 and 29. So I'm waiting to be a grandma. Don't tell them I said that. But it was really a learning opportunity and a lesson learned, frankly, that the next time our kids were right there in the front row, and people got to see us not in stereotypically gay ways, which is not as parents, but got to see us as families. And that made a huge difference.
Yeah, I think to your point about sharing the story about lesbians using sperm banks, I think it's a nice corollary to the fact that the reality is, regardless of how much our communities are using services or not, we are more visible when we use those services than other folks, right? So when you think about, as you described earlier, ICSI, or putting like one sperm into the egg, has kind of solved the problem of male infertility. So a heterosexual couple can go to a fertility clinic. Even if there's issues with the sperm, we can do an advanced technique. You can still have a genetic child. Historically, when that wasn't an option and folks used a sperm donor, a lot of times that sperm donor was kept secret. Like, people didn't want to share that they were infertile, that they had to use someone outside of the family. Whereas a lesbian couple or a single woman that's using a sperm donor, that's obvious. It's the same situation with a same-sex male couple. You didn't carry that pregnancy more than likely. Obviously, there are exceptions, and folks don't always appear their gender. But regardless of the usage of us using these services, it just becomes more pronounced. It's also sometimes something that we're proud of as a community. A lesbian couple might have used a sperm donor that they know, and it's an important part of it's a different kinship structure that they're proud of. A gay couple, I think there's a study that shows that anywhere from 70 to 90% of gay couples want to stay in touch with their gestational carrier because they formed a relationship. It's an important part of the family. Whereas a couple that comes to see me who's infertile, they may want nothing to do with the egg donor because it's a reminder that they were infertile. They may want nothing to do with the gestational carrier because they wanted to carry the pregnancy but had a medical reason that they couldn't. And these issues aren't specific to people that are infertile, but I just think they're very different. I think queer family building is so much more about a large community that's not just the nuclear family, right? Like, mom, dad, child. We're so much bigger and different than that. So I do think we can be allies with one another for sure.
100%. And I have to say, I have to train my staff, because in my law firm, I have probably about 50-50 LGBTQ families and straight families, and I have to train my staff to have very different approaches with those two groups, because you know, the gay male couples who come to me, this is plan A. They're excited and they're happy and, you know, it's all good. And I mean, there's problem solving to do, but this is plan A. They're thrilled to be able to be on this journey. The straight couples who come are in mourning for the most part. They're processing grief at the fact that they've had to take these steps that they never expected to take to become parents. So I absolutely think that LGBTQ parents have an enormous gift to bring, certainly to the infertility communities, and also to parenting at large.
I want to tie to two of the issues we just heard. So first of all, what Brent was saying about visibility. And in fact, the position you're about to take is an example of how you can make, you know, and use visibility to produce better outcomes. Because, I mean, one can say, I mean, why do you need this kind of, you know, separate but equal type of thing? Why do you need to have an LGBTQ family building? Why isn't it family building, period? I mean, aren't we all the same? But no, we are not at the point that we're treated the same, that people have the same expectations to us. We don't get to family building the same way as Deb was just saying. So it is accommodation, it is being mindful of those differences, but it is also visibility. And visibility is education, and visibility is also pride. And what they were saying is that when people started seeing us and seeing our humanity, not that we're obliged to have to prove that we're human, that made a big difference. And the other part of it is that indeed we're pioneers in many ways by being more mindful, coming to this in a different way, being more sensitive to how we come to this. We sometimes bring models of, you know, equality, of care, of breaking down gender stereotypes around care, and family structures, families of more than two parents, and all these other things are all issues that are, we're at a much better position to pioneer and do it, you know, proudly. There are people who are still going, heterosexual couples, through surrogacy with pregnancy pillows. That the prospective mom is walking around with a pillow that's progressively imitating stages of pregnancy so that they do not have to ever disclose that they needed the assistance of a surrogate. It has, you know, issues then with their children.
Yeah.
Because when you don't disclose to society, you're often tempted to not disclose to your children. And we're, of course, don't even have that temptation. But we're all, I hope to think, are also more mindful. So I don't want to take too much of the time as we are all behind, you know, past a long day of a lot of information and stimulation. I just want to tie back to something we'll talk about more tomorrow, and that is that there is the potential now to have some progress regarding, for instance, IVF in the state, and our Family Coalition and NCLR are two of the organizations that are at the forefront with others to try to promote this particular bill. NCLR has teamed up with Men Having Babies and Resolve, the National Infertility Association. It's all about alliances, to come up with the original definition. In fact, thanks to Kathy Sakimura at the time at NCLR, we found a really good definition that satisfied what is so far been proving to be the needs we had for formulating something that will allow us to get more equal IVF benefits. And I'd like you to join us in that kind of advocacy. You'll hear about it tomorrow too, but soon there'll be a time to send emails and letters to legislators here in California. Those of you who've been here last year, we thought it's almost going to pass. Last year it didn't, so we're not going to stop. There are instances within our community. I'm going to say it here. Bay Area Reporter is refusing to report about our conferences because their editor thinks that surrogacy is despicable. And we've been spending thousands of dollars in advertising. They take our money, but they wouldn't report about it. It's your institution. It's our main media organization in this area, of this community. Yet somebody's misconceptions about surrogacy allows them to decide on their own that we're not deserving of that kind of support. I may be wrong, but I'd like to be proven wrong. But it's been 8 years that they've been refusing to cover our conferences. So it is our task as a community to fight these misconceptions and fight this skepticism, because if anybody wants, they can come here and listen and engage with us and find out whether surrogacy could also be an ethical path for parenting. So I will let you all say if you have anything to add, and then we'll wrap up and continue some of this conversation in different panels tomorrow as well. But if you have anything you would like to add before we wrap up.
Go ahead. Well, I just really want to say that it's really important that if you are making a choice to have a family, then you have every single right to have that family and to not do it alone. This law will absolutely get passed. I have no doubt in my mind, and it's all about coalition building and making sure that we support each other's causes, and that we really just push our legislators to do the right thing, right? And yeah, and so when the time comes when we need you to rally, please rally with us. And when the time comes when you need our support, please reach out, because we have a lot of different support systems in place to help you have a successful outcome in whatever it is that you do want.
Yeah, and I will just say, I think San Francisco is a very fitting place for this conversation, and this was a big area of kind of the concept of families we choose, and I think when that was really becoming part of the conversation in the 80s, we still weren't really viewing gestational carrier and egg donation as a possibility, and so now families we choose for queer individuals now does include this other really beautiful way to build families, and I think obviously at this conference, that's a major focus, but I think a big takeaway should be there's really no right way to build your family, and so there's so many different ways to do that, whether it's co-parenting, foster, adoption, surrogacy, and I think that the queer kind of fabric is that we're doing all of these things in a way that's really special, and so, we're here to support people however you want to build your family. It doesn't have to be one way is the only way.
So, and being the Deborah up here, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but I will say, when my sons were in elementary school, our elementary school was the first public school we are aware of that had gay pride days. And we did these really sweet assemblies that were age appropriate, that all the kids loved. And Bill Withers' Lean on Me was the song of the school, and everyone knew it. And I'm watching the whole Don't Say Gay thing going down in Florida right now, and having these intense flashbacks. And so, as the lawyer up here, I want to say, be careful, y'all. Take good care of yourselves legally. Make smart choices about how you're becoming parents, about making sure your children are protected, that each of you has a clear legal relationship with any children you're raising together. Just make good choices, because we're everywhere. We've made incredible progress, and it also is a little ugly out there right now. And so, and to Mimi's point, depending on how many of the marginalized community boxes you check in, even more so. Just be careful, be proud, keep going, don't let anyone stop you, and be careful.
I couldn't wrap it up any better, so I'm going to invite Jenny now to give us a few housekeeping announcements before we release. Jenny, the first third of the